Man of Steel is a complicated movie. As much as it is appreciated by many, it's still a story filled with problems such as intergalactic civilizations that suddenly become extinct, scientists who are more competent fighters than military soldiers, and plot armor capable of making a reporter challenge the laws of gravity by not being sucked into a black hole. But as many of these details can be ignored by the audience for the simple desire to enjoy one more adaptation of such a popular character, I find myself questioning whether this said character has really had justice done to his name. But notice how curious it is. The more I looked into the facts presented in the story, more and more I was being pushed towards the inevitable conclusion that this Superman is a completely broken character. Oh no, but the reason you don't like it is just because you're a hater. And no. Oh, so you didn't like it because you are a Marvel fag? Yeah, neither. Oh, I know. So it's because you've never read the comics and that's why you don't even like Superman. Yeah, you know what? It could have been, yet once again, no. But I can point out three main reasons that made me reach this heavy conclusion. Three reasons that made me see how broken this character becomes throughout this narrative. And the first reason is his relationships. The best we get from this character comes when he is still a child. Little Clark, at this point, has a good characterization between him and his mother when both connect in an emotional level due to the changes in his body, as well as when he shows himself to be a rational and empathetic boy for saving the life of children inside a bus in the middle of a river, even the life of those who bullied him. And when the boy discovers his origins, he becomes a little terrified because he just wanted to be an ordinary child and didn't desire to have the weight of such a responsibility on his shoulders. Here, we have Clark being empathetic, vulnerable, and kind at his core. Problems begin to arise with the introduction of his father, Jonathan Kent. In contrast to his son, his morality is much more flexible. Upon seeing the growing gossip about how Clark has powers after saving everybody on the bus, Jonathan, in conversation with Clark, reprehends him for using his powers. And when the poor kid asks what he should have done, if he was just supposed to let them drown, his father literally replies, "Maybe!" What do you mean, maybe? Jonathan Kent's thinking is that because his son is so special, maybe humanity isn't ready to meet him, whatever that means, and that upon learning of the existence of super powerful beings, the world will never be the same again. And so he takes these worries out on his son in order to silence the boy for doing a good deed. His intention is for Clark to decide who he wants to be in the future, but only once he grows up. For now, Jonathan just wants him to be careful and protect himself and his secret. The guy says this in the scene that features the ship his son came from, but this opinion proves to be redundant as two future scenes completely break this line of thought. One, when his son is bullied in front of him, and Jonathan says to Clark that he must decide what kind of man he wants to grow up to be, which is a lie since Jonathan is the one making the decisions for him. And another, when Clark is clearly much older and already wants to take control of his own life, and even so, the father chooses his own death instead of letting the boy make the choice to reveal himself to the world by saving him. Clark's relationship with his adopted father doesn't work from any perspective because Jonathan is completely useless. Before we see the scene of him lecturing Clark, it is already established in the film that this was not the first time they had this conversation, and that Clark has used his powers before, probably to save other people. And even after his death, Clark never stops saving lives whenever he can. Be it helping workers on an oil scaffold, or treating a reporter in the middle of an alien spaceship. Which means Clark never cared about keeping his powers a secret to the detriment of the lives of others, neither before nor after his father's passing. The only time he doesn't save someone before getting his uniform is when he leaves his father to die, and that's done in an absolute ridiculous scene. In the middle of a hurricane, they realize they left the dog behind. And instead of leaving Clark, a much younger boy and who, even if he didn't have powers, would be the best option to go run to the car and come back, Jonathan is stricken by the protagonist syndrome and takes upon himself the extremely dangerous responsibility of carrying out this task. If it was Clark in his place, he would have done the same thing. And if something was going to hurt his leg, as was the case with Jonathan, he wouldn't have been hurt because he has superpowers. And seriously, were anyone going to say, "Oh, look everybody, that guy has superpowers. Look how easily he runs to the car and opens the door. He must be an alien." Man, seriously, that scene was very forced. And in general, their relationship does not change who Clark is, presenting a terrible redundant father who wants his son to decide what kind of man he wants to grow up to be, while he himself gives a BS hint of what Clark should do with his life. All of this just eating up more and more screen time instead of working other childhood relationships. Because Clark is portrayed as being a more reclusive kid at school, but we don't have any ramifications of that. The least we see is the chubby redhead who used to make fun of him on the bus, and after being saved, became more sympathetic to Clark. But what then? Were they friends? Did they interact at school? What about the little girl on the bus who defended Clark from the bullying? How was their relationship once she saw Clark saving everybody? And how about the rest of the kids at school? Man, so many facets of him that could have been explored, but were lost in favor of a very irrelevant plot with his adopted father. And if this, which is the biggest relationship he has in the beginning of the film, was bad, what about the others? Because when Clark finally meets his biological father, the only thing they both have is exposition scenes. Jor-El tells the story of Krypton, and Clark during the whole conversation barely reacts, doesn't ask what life was like on this planet, what were their beliefs, what was his biological mother like, and all that kind of stuff. The two of them don't have a father and son relationship trying to get to know each other. They only have a character relationship that needs to convey content demanded by the script, and a character that serves as an ear for the audience to absorb this information. The only moment here where Clark shows more emotions is when he flies. And that doesn't even say much about his character, because he spent his whole life having powers, so it's not like one more would make him change any opinion he has about himself. The most emotional moment regarding his past is when he's reunited with his adoptive mother and is happy to know where he came from. And the worst thing is that the biological father suffers the same problem as the adoptive one, since Jor-El said, in front of Zod, that his son would be free to choose his own path. But now in his kid's face, he keeps saying stuff like, and before we see what decisions Clark has come to regarding his place in the human race, Zod invades the Earth and we are robbed of the future scenes of Clark alone with his dilemma. How would he act if the antagonist had not appeared? What was he going to do? Now that he knows his past and his history, what conclusions does he draw from it? Nothing explains his actions here. Zod's arrival halts his development and forces him out of the shadows, but more on that later. His relationship with Lois, on the other hand, is one of the most ridiculous, attractive people novels I've ever seen. No kidding, their interactions can be summarized up to he saves her in the ship, she investigates and finds him, then he tells her a sad backstory about his father's death, convincing her to leave him alone. Then she is caught by the FBI in order to reveal who is the alien living among humans, and Clark gives himself up to save her yet again. So, does that sound boring yet? Hold up, it gets worse. Then they go to Zod's ship together, where she saves him from the Kryptonian atmosphere, only for him to save her again from the fall back to Earth. She helps him figure out how to defeat Zod, and he, for the last time, saves her from a black hole that for some reason didn't suck her in. And yep, that's it. Finally, we have a couple. And I gotta ask, what the hell? Why? Why are you guys together? On Lois' part, I can understand a little bit. I mean, look at this square jaw super Chad hottie, stronger and cooler than any other guy I've ever met and will ever meet on this planet. Okay, cool, justifiable. But on his part, it is like, okay, I guess she's hot? Bro, Superman, you barely show your feelings properly, and when you two kiss, it comes out of nowhere. The film wants so bad to force her presence in the narrative, just to push this couple, to the point of putting her in ridiculous situations. She is called to the alien's ship for no reason, she is summoned to the military airplane to conclude the last offensive against the Earth's invasion, and she is teleported to the museum just to appear in the final scene with our boy Clark here. Ridiculous. And when it comes to him, we have his father's relationships completely destroyed. Both are incoherent, wanting him to trace his own destiny at the same time that they both choose what destiny that should be. Both are unable to interact with him in order to change his views or bring out new perspectives and visions on his path. The Clark who talks to Jor-El is the same Clark we had before said conversation. The Clark who gets reprehended by Jonathan is the same before and after his death. And the only scene Clark almost had anything relevant with Jonathan was when they were arguing in the car, and even there the movie doesn't show where the fight came from, and it doesn't get concluded because a hurricane interrupts the dialogue. His relationship with his sexuality is unclear, his friendships do not exist, and the only good thing we can take from him is his affection for his mother, who easily connects with the boy, seeking to care about her son's conflicts, at the same time as welcoming him with open and caring arms. And the good thing is that when it comes to Martha, all of that comes without incoherent messages. Oh, and let's not forget the guy with the truck. Holy shit, man. Clark's relationship with bullies had already been shown with the chubby ginger on the bus and the douchebags who bother him on his father's farm. But suddenly, when older, Clark seems to think it's a good idea to impale a guy's truck with huge logs just because he threw beer in his face? Man, it is impossible for this not to become public knowledge. Like if no one would find it super bizarre, a lot of wood logs impaling a truck. This is his most ridiculous attitude so far, and for some reason there is still debate in the film whether he should reveal himself or not. This is a joke. It's completely incoherent. You cannot have, in the same story, a character concerned about revealing himself to the world at the same time that the dude takes such a stupid attitude. Really unbelievable. As for our second reason why this character is broken, we have Clark's conflicts. In the first hour of the film, his main dilemma is whether or not to reveal himself to human race. Being the biggest supporter of this idea, his father Jonathan. This is actually what prevents Clark from ever taking up the hero's mantle, and of course serving as the Superman we all know. The big problem with this conflict in the narrative is that it used almost half of the entire film to be developed, only to have its resolution thrown in the trash. Because after so many years on Earth, Clark finally found out about his Kryptonian past and even had an entire ship with the memory of his biological father inserted on to guide him in his future decisions. After that, the only thing we see is the protagonist returning home to hug his mother, happy to find his origins, and that's it. Soon after, the plot continues and Zod appears, revealing to the human race that aliens do, in fact, exist and are powerful enough to threaten our entire planet. But did y'all catch that? I will summarize. The big conflict in the first half of the film is whether Clark should reveal himself to the world or not, and who ends up doing that and making that decision for him is the villain. Zod himself reveals his big secret, forcing Clark to become a hero who clearly came from another planet. Man, this is so problematic. It is an issue of the narrative that takes from its protagonist a key personal development of his character. What Clark was spontaneously going to do after getting his uniform would be a milestone in his growth as a person. And not only that, this whole situation gets worse, since even if Zod didn't show up, that internal conflict would also be very weak, because Clark always saved people since he was a child and never stopped doing so. It turns out to be just a predictable conflict, where we are just waiting for the protagonist to finally announce himself to the world, and it is still discarded since the villain is the one who solves it for him. Then Clark reveals himself to the military, goes to Zod's ship with Lois, and finally villain and protagonist meet face to face. Zod puts him in a machine capable of creating simulations, and the two just stuck there. In this scene, we have another wasted potential in the narrative. Our antagonist aims to recreate his race, and for that, he is willing to terraform the Earth, destroying humanity in the process. This is our second major conflict in the script, and it is by far the most poorly explained possible. Let us all recap here. Zod needs three things. He needs two ships capable of altering the Earth's core. That's cool, he already has it. He needs Jor-El's ship, where the artificial wombs are located. He can do that easily, just go to the ship. And he needs the Codex, which is the key to the genetic code of every Kryptonian. Being that disturbed, he still doesn't know where it is. Then what is the guy's big brain plan? He just tells Clark that he intends to destroy the planet where he has lived his whole life to reborn Krypton. Genius! My guy, what do you mean? First, why don't you try to negotiate with Clark under the pretense of appearing more reasonable? And you could even say that you plan to create a new society on a planet other than Earth. That way, you wouldn't have the protagonist as an enemy, but as an ally. And let's not forget that Clark has the power to destroy all the ships you need for your plan to work. So why go to the guy's planet, threatening to kill everybody, and simply asking him to accept it? It doesn't make sense. But it gets worse, because the most obvious argument in this situation is, bro, why terraform this planet? Clark has been alive for decades here. Why not have Kryptonians born on Earth's natural atmosphere and become gods among humans? And the most meaningless part of this film is the justification that the script itself gives for this obvious question that I raised. Ignore the fact that Zod didn't even take 20 minutes to adapt to Earth, and Clark himself has only one scene of suffering with the discovery of his powers. The idea of adapting to the Earth's atmosphere is such a simple process that it's no valid argument for Zod to say that both races can't coexist. The biggest conflict in this film is only present here because of an incoherent technicality, and it is this conflict that guides Clark's character throughout the whole second half. Because since Zod is a genocidal madman, the only option Clark has is to eliminate him with no room for discussion or debate. This traps the protagonist in this inevitable route of no return and ends up, once again, taking away a large part of his autonomy as to how to solve a problem, since the solution is so obvious and undisputable, which is Zod and his crew have to die. And towards the end of the film, there is still a small appeal from Zod to Clark so that he does not destroy the ship where the artificial wombs are. But the request is easily ignored, since all of this destruction comes to the detriment of humanity. Clark doesn't even have time to reason the weight of his choice to destroy Krypton, because every second that Zod's plans are not interrupted, more and more people die. And it's a shame to see that, because the potential for our hero to have that moment of reflection about the end of his race would be something extraordinary. After so much time looking for his origins and trying to find out where he comes from, what is his purpose, and finally finding out about Krypton and his father's wishes for him to be a bridge between two worlds, all of that ends up disappearing before his eyes, given the fact that to stop Zod, he needs to extinguish his own species. But unfortunately, this is very poorly explored. And finally, the third reason why this Superman is a broken character is direction. Because as if Clark's relationships were not enough, and the fact that they barely explore all facets of his character and how his conflicts are either very deterministic or simply abandoned, we also have Zack Snyder's direction both in terms of the structure of the narrative and also in terms of the guidance of his actor, Henry Cavill. because it is the director's job to translate the way in which the work is presented, and he may interfere with the ideas in the script if they prove to be incoherent or out of place. As for the problems pointed out in the writing, I think I've already made myself clear. But man, one of the most obvious criticisms of this film is the way Superman seems to not give a damn about the people's lives. He himself is the one to fly Zod into Smallville, and once he gets there, already breaking a lot of things and blowing up a gas station. The guy doesn't have the slightest effort to change the place of the fight, even if enough time is given to him. And he recognizes very well the damage he causes in the city, because right before he starts to face the woman and the huge guy, he tells people,
"Get inside. It's not safe."
Bro, you are a moron! You have arrived here exploding giant concrete structures, and now you're telling everybody to hide in their establishments. Wow! This is the city where you grew up, bro. The ginger boy himself appears around the corner. Clark grew up on the farm, but when he needed something from the city, that's the city he came to. His school is probably here, and the guy arrives blowing everything up, doesn't change the place of the fight, and barely shows any emotions during the fight itself. Dude, you are more than capable of seeing that people around you are dying with this chaos. And yet you don't take any action to change the situation. And there are some people who still argue that Superman wouldn't have time to do that. After all, he's in the middle of a fight, right? Wrong. In that same scene, some military soldiers appear, and at one point one of them falls out of the helicopter, and Clark, realizing what's happening, quickly flies to save that said soldier. Always keep this in your mind, guys. If you establish something in a narrative, you are also creating a precedent. If in the middle of a battle, Clark can stop focusing on enemies to save one person, that is an objective and irrefutable sign that he is indeed aware of his surroundings and the consequences of the destruction around him. So, if that's the case, why the hell didn't the direction recognize this and made Clark more nervous and desperate for every time a building was destroyed? It could be a scene where he tried to move the battle to another place and was stopped, or a scene where he tried to leave, but his opponents would then begin to use the innocent as hostages, forcing the protagonist to stay and fight. But none of this is shown. It is he who decides to take the fight to Smallville, and that seems to be just a creative decision on the part of the direction, just in favor of the spectacle that it is seeing the city being absolutely destroyed on screen. This problem is repeated on an even larger scale towards the end of the film. Metropolis being completely leveled and in ruins, it's still not enough for Clark to show big emotions about this tragedy. Thousands are being killed, a catastrophe of biblical proportions that will certainly go down in the history of humanity as a landmark of destruction and suffering, and in the middle of all of that, there is this guy kissing a reporter. Dude, are you serious? This scene comes right after he has destroyed the ship that carry his race's future, and the way he reacts to that is by making out with Lois. And then we get to the end of the film, and when Zod threatens to kill a random family, Clark becomes super worried and finally chooses to execute Zod, only to fall to his knees and vents the supposed weight he's feeling about exterminating his race once and for all. But again, I repeat, when you create a precedent and then contradict yourself later, you are breaking more and more of your script. By the time Zod and Clark started fighting, they were already the last Kryptonians. Clark still has the codex on his body, but the ship with the wombs is completely destroyed by then. And what was Clark's reaction right after the future of his species was doomed? Oh yeah, this one right here. Seriously, brother. It makes no sense to get to the end of the fight and, after seeing Zod's dead body, to lament the future of his race. My guy, neither you nor Zod could get pregnant. The species ended with you firing lasers to destroy the ship. Why didn't you cry at that time? The direction of Clark's character is sadly pathetic. The peaks of emotion shown by the actor during his adult life are very scarce throughout a film that should be a roller coaster of feelings for this guy. He discovered his alien origins, met his biological father just to know the sad end he and his entire home planet suffered, witnessed and became a part of the greatest catastrophe in the modern world, and the dude does it all for the most part of the story with that face, with that stupid face. Jor-El telling his entire origin story, that face. His hometown being attacked and completely destroyed, and he's with that face in a completely devastating American metropolis around him, and the guy makes that face. And then he wants to convince me that he cares about Zod's death? Bro, that character is completely destroyed. It's not even possible to appreciate the few moments where he seems to be a real human, like when Jonathan dies, or when he tries to save his own mother from Zod's threats, where at that point he shows himself to be very pissed off. None of that is able to save everything else that was shown from this character, who does have an absurd potential for success, but who is sadly thrown in the trash. I gotta give a big round of applause for the Clark as a child, because there you could still see genuine and coherent conflicts mixed with a convincing performance. But this, in the midst of so many problems with relationships that don't work, that are redundant shamelessly, or serve more as exposition rather than a way to explore shapes of a poorly written protagonist. This ends up creating a hero that is ironically very weak, which, to make matters worse, has conflicts of extremely obvious solutions that are partially even solved by the antagonist himself. All of this ends up being concluded with the fact that Zack's direction does not know how to recognize who the character presented here is and how he should react emotionally to the discoveries he suffers throughout the narrative in wasting his great potential along the journey. And with that, I want to thank everyone who made this far. Please like and share the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you have seen my older videos, I hope you enjoy the new editing. I really want to take this channel to another level, and I hope to be providing a good quality content. I'm gonna leave on the card my latest video about Pulp Fiction, which, in contrast to Man of Steel, is a film that knew exactly well how to take advantage of its premises and its characters. Sounds good? Thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.